Alright, hi everyone, this is Manas. We'll be covering alternative investments as per CFA Level 1. This lecture will be in Hindi and English mix. So, in alternative investments, there are three modules in total. We'll be going over the first one, that is categories, characteristics, and compensation structures of alternative investments. So, traditional investments, everyone knows about stocks, bonds, and cash. Cash over here refers to T-bills or zero coupon bonds which are less than 1 year. Alternative investment, what does it cover? So it covers private capital which can be subdivided into private equity and private debt, real assets, that is real estate, infrastructure, and natural resources, and then finally hedge funds. So why alternative investments? So let's say our investment universe is limited to stocks and bonds. तो हमारे जो इन्वेस्टमेंट जो हम कर सकते हैं वो लिमिट हो जाते हैं. बट लेट्स से वी ऑल्सो लुक इन टू अदर एसेट्स that allows us to diversify our portfolio better. An example can be, let's say we put some money in gold. So gold in general has a low correlation with traditional assets. So that allows us to optimize the risk return structure of the portfolio. What are the other benefits? So alternative investments, they tap into non-traditional markets. For example, let's say we take a stock. The stock, in the stock price, a lot of the news is already baked in. So the markets tend to be mostly efficient. But in some of the less traded, assets, the markets are relatively inefficient. So we can take advantage of that inefficiency and increase the returns of our portfolio. So we'll go over the characteristics in detail. So first is the specialization aspect of investment managers. So जैसे मैंने बताया, I work in real estate, I work as an analyst. So my day-to-day job is mostly restricted to looking into returns, risk return structures of real estate assets, especially, and that too in some particular subclasses. So that is where the specialization effect takes place. Then the other thing I mentioned earlier, that there is low correlation of returns with those of traditional assets. Fair regulation and transparency is less. So one example I can give here, let's say in case of mutual funds. So mutual funds are required to be registered with SEBI in India. Hedge funds की requirement नहीं है कि वो SEBI registered हो. तो रेगुलेशन कम है बिकॉज SEBI के जो रूल्स हैं वो म्यूचुअल फंड्स पे अप्लाई हो रहे हैं बट वो हेज फंड्स पे अप्लाई नहीं हो रहे हैं. Similarly, we can talk about transparency. So mutual funds, if you go online, search a mutual fund, उनकी holding क्या है, you can look at what all stocks they have, what is the net asset value on a daily basis. Hedge funds, ये information available mostly नहीं होती है. In some cases it might be available, but there is relatively less transparency. Then because of these characteristics, the alternative investments, they exhibit the following. So one is limited reliable historical data and of course the risk data. So as I said कि भाई transparency कम है तो reliable data मिलना मुश्किल है. Tax structure or legal structure भी different है. Legal structure, I gave an example that, for example, this requires to be registered with SEBI. Hedge funds do not. Tax consideration हम ये कह सकते हैं, stocks में long term capital gains होते हैं, short term capital gains होते हैं. Real estate, for example, India में if you purchase a property and you sell it with a capital gain, अगर तुम एक दूसरी प्रॉपर्टी खरीद लो let's say in less than 1 year, तो जो कैपिटल गेन है वो हमें टैक्स भरना ज़रूरी नहीं है. यू कैन कैरी फॉरवर्ड टू द नेक्स्ट प्रॉपर्टी. सो दैट इज़ एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ टैक्स कंसिडरेशन. फीस इन चीज़ों में ज़्यादा होती है बिकॉज दे रिक्वायर स्पेशलाइज मैनेजर्स, सो दे चार्ज अ हायर एसेट मैनेजमेंट फी. In mutual funds it is less than 1%, maybe like 0.1 or 0.2, which is the expense ratio. Hedge funds usually have 1 or maybe in some cases 2%. And hedge funds, they also charge a performance fee. So let's say they are targeting a 10% minimum return and they are able to generate 15%, so वो 5% पे extra charge करेंगे. Concentrated portfolios, so as I said, I work as an analyst in real estate. So I look into a very specialized category of assets. So because of that, and that is also in a particular area. So that is why a lot of the portfolio is concentrated. If the market in that particular area or that particular class goes down, that will impact the entire portfolio. Then there are restrictions on redemptions. So mutual funds may, let's say you put the money in today, a week later you want your money back, you can simply trade the money out, sell your mutual fund holdings, and you should be good. Hedge funds and other private equity funds में ये मुश्किल होगा because they usually invest in illiquid assets, so it's very difficult to trade them. So what they do, they have a lockup or gates. We'll be discussing this later. So restrictions are there on redemptions. Then we can look into the categories. So first thing that we looked at was private capital. Private capital को हम classify कर सकते हैं private equity में and private debt में. Venture capital is a subcategory of private equity. So what is private equity? So private equity, जैसे आप if you look at a show like Shark Tank, what they do is they invest in startups and they invest their money in, sometimes there are people who are coming in with who are established operations, so they establish there as well. And bigger private equity firms, they'll establish, like they'll invest in a lot of firms which are not listed on the public exchange. एक उनका मेथड ये भी होता है कि वो कोई पब्लिक कंपनी को पूरा खरीद लें, उसको प्राइवेट कर लें, राइट. सो दैट इज प्राइवेट इक्विटी एंड दिस विल बी डिस्कस लेटर ऑन इन फर्दर रीडिंग्स. वेंचर कैपिटल, सो वेंचर कैपिटल भी न्यूज़ में रहता है बिकॉज दे आर स्पेशलाइज पी फंड्स जो बहुत अर्ली स्टेज स्टार्टअप्स में इन्वेस्ट करते हैं जिसमें ग्रोथ पोटेंशियल उनको बहुत अच्छा लगता है. प्राइवेट डेट इज समथिंग विच इज़ टेकिंग डेट फ्रॉम एंटिटीज़ विच आर नॉट ट्रेडिशनल. फॉर एग्जाम्पल जो लेंडर्स हैं आपके, बैंक्स हो गए या NBFCs हो गए, उनसे आप लोन ना लेके आप किसी प्राइवेट एंटिटी से लें. सो फर्स्ट इज लाइक डायरेक्ट लेंडिंग, which is, let's say I give out a loan to somebody, that can be termed a private loan, so there were no intermediaries involved. The second is mezzanine debt. So this is subordinate debt. How this works is, let's say you purchase a property with some equity and you take a loan from the bank, but there is still some shortfall. So लोग क्या करेंगे कि वो जो बैलेंस मनी है वो लेंड कर देंगे बट एट हायर रेट कंपेयर टू व्हाट द बैंक इज चार्जिंग. So that is a subordinate debt. And venture debt is simply, giving loans to very early stage startups or companies. And then categories of real estate or real assets. This is relatively straightforward. Real estate can include, buildings, offices, malls. So a lot of companies, they buy offices, malls, like entirely that is their portfolio. Or it can be, private commercial debt. So a lot of companies, they'll give out loans, so they have a portfolio of loans or mortgages. So mortgages are loans on homes. And अब real estate investments, they can also be public. So India में भी अब public REITs आ गई हैं. So REIT is a real estate investment trust. So a REIT basically is a company where there are a lot of investors. They put their money in, and this real estate investment trust will purchase companies, like purchase buildings, एंड उसके कैश फ्लो से इनको डिविडेंड्स देंगे और अपना पोर्टफोलियो ग्रो करेंगे. एंड पब्लिक रियल एस्टेट डेट, मॉर्गेज बैक सिक्योरिटीज इज समथिंग विच बैंक्स डू. आई थिंक इंडिया में इतना कॉमन नहीं है बट इट्स वेरी कॉमन इन द US, एंड दे क्लब a lot of loans together and then they trade it as a security. So even I can invest in that and उसका जो इंटरेस्ट आ रहा है that can be my cash flow. Infrastructure, so basically this includes capital intensive long-lived assets. So airports, highways, railways. So इनका primarily intent होता है public use and services. Then natural resources, so commodities. So these are grains, metals, crude oil. So एक physical form में भी हो सकते हैं और derivative contracts भी हो सकते हैं इनके. Then agriculture land, quite straightforward. And then we have timberland. Then other categories of real assets include, art, wine, cars. So people like to buy and collect, old wines, some rare cars. So they are also real assets. And intangible real assets can include digital assets. So NFTs बहुत popular हुआ था. That is a digital asset. And then we have patents which are also traded. Now we'll look into the categories of hedge funds. So hedge fund is termed as an investment vehicle that manages portfolio of securities, and they usually employ a lot of derivatives in their positions. Some of the strategies are listed here: long short, market neutral, dedicated short, event driven, opportunistic. So long short is, so they hold a long position in some sector or some company, and short position in some other company. So they are trying to make money out of both the positions. Long position in something which is undervalued, and short position in something which is overvalued. Market neutral is they manage a portfolio in such a way that the market risk, that is beta, of that portfolio is zero. So they try to make money irrespective of the fact whether the market goes up or whether the market goes down. Dedicated short, they are, आपने term सुना होगा, short sellers. So they take short positions, like heavy short positions in their portfolio against companies which they deem to be very overvalued, or they might seem that this is like an account, like some kind of irregularities in the company, and they expect the share price of that company to move down. Event driven companies, so they try to take opportunities which arise in the market, mostly in cases of mergers and acquisitions. So when company A acquires company B, they might think that okay, the price of company B will go up and the price of company A will go down. So they'll take relevant positions in order to capture that arbitrage. Opportunistic, they invest in niche markets where there are not a lot of people. They might also be investing in certain strategies like convertible bonds. So convertible bonds are bonds which can be converted to equity. So if they feel there's a mispricing in the equity price and the convertible bond price, they'll take relevant positions in order to gain from that mispricing. So how do you invest in alternative assets? It's very straightforward in the sense that you can, as an investor, you can directly invest in something. So for example, you are an investor, you can directly go ahead, buy a building or an office or any space and lease it out. That is a direct investment. You can invest in a fund. So in our case, let's say you can invest in a REIT like Embassy Office REIT. So they will go ahead and they will purchase offices and then they'll rent it out, and those will be their investments and they'll generate cash flows for the investor. Co-investing is somewhere in the middle where you also invest with the fund, but you also have a portion of your funds that are directly invested in some particular investment. So हर मेथड का एक एडवांटेज है, डिसएडवांटेज है. फंड इन्वेस्टमेंट रिलेटिवली ईजी होता है फॉर इन्वेस्टर्स हु डू नॉट हैव लॉट ऑफ एक्सपीरियंस, बिकॉज यहाँ पर आपने सारा काम जो है फंड मैनेजर को आउटसोर्स कर दिया है टू फिगर आउट वेयर ही शुड बी पुटिंग द मनी इन. एंड कैपिटल रिक्वायर्ड कम है. Purchasing a building directly would require a lot of money, but you can just purchase a few shares of a REIT and you'll get exposure to that particular office building. Disadvantage क्या है? Because there is somebody else who is managing your money, they'll charge a higher management fee and performance fee, right? And it is important to do a lot of due diligence कि भाई आप कहाँ पर किस फंड मैनेजर को आप अपना पैसा पकड़ा रहे हैं, क्योंकि he'll be responsible or she'll be responsible for putting that money in investments. So it is important to understand how that fund manager is or how the fund is. And the other thing which I mentioned earlier is lockup and restrictions. So sometimes it happens that you put your money in, but it's difficult to take the money out because of some restrictions in the funds. So that is something somebody needs to, like somebody who's investing in funds needs to be aware of. Second, let's say we'll talk about direct investing. So here you are purchasing the property directly, so you're avoiding the management fee, and it provides the greatest flexibility because you can choose where you want to put the money in, and because you are controlling the assets directly, you have the highest level of control. But इसके drawbacks ये हैं कि because you will be purchasing the properties directly, आपको ही hire करना पड़ेगा एक analyst या market research team to figure out which investment you should be going for. So आपकी internal cost बढ़ जाती है. एक फंड जो है वो मल्टीपल जगह इन्वेस्ट करता है, तो फंड के डाइवर्सिफिकेशन बेनिफिट्स होते हैं, बट बिकॉज यू आर इन्वेस्टिंग सेलेक्टिवली, योर डाइवर्सिफिकेशन बेनिफिट्स विल बी नेगेटेड इन दिस केस. Due diligence will get complex because now everything will be done by the investor directly. So he will have to go through all the legal documentation, what are the rules, this and that. Because earlier this was being done by the fund manager, now it is being done directly by the investor. And minimum capital requirements, of course, will be higher compared to a fund. Now, in between this, we have co-investing, so you get some of the benefits of both and some of the disadvantages of both. सो यहाँ पर इन्वेस्टर जिसके पास थोड़ा एक्सपीरियंस आ सकता है वो इस मेथड को फॉलो कर सकता है, बिकॉज ही इज़ इन्वेस्टिंग पोर्शन ऑफ द मनी डायरेक्टली, तो मैनेजमेंट फ़ी कम हो गई है, एंड because of the direct investment it allows for more active control compared to fund investing. Similarly, but the other thing is you are reducing control over investment selection, because earlier a lot of the selection was being done at the fund level. Now the fund has selected it and you are just putting money next to the fund, so control relatively कम है. एडवर्स सिलेक्शन बायस है कि भाई यहाँ फंड ने पैसा लगाया आपने भी वहाँ लगा दिया, नॉट नेसेसरी कि भाई जो फंड ने पैसा लगाया वो एकदम बेस्ट लगाया है. एंड एक्टिव मैनेजमेंट बढ़ जाएगी बिकॉज यहाँ पर मोस्टली पैसिव था, बिकॉज नो वर्क वॉज रिक्वायर्ड फ्रॉम द इन्वेस्टर. यहाँ पर आपको अपने एंड से भी थोड़ा वर्क करना पड़ेगा. So in terms of how private funds work is, most hedge funds and private equity firms, they have a partnership structure where there is a LP and there is a GP. So GP is the one, the general partner, who is looking into the day-to-day operations of that fund. And LP जो होता है वो उसके पास interest होते हैं. Interest in the sense that the LP has a percentage ownership of the fund. So GP, because they are doing the day-to-day operations, they are deciding where to invest, where to pull the money out from. They receive a management fee for the assets that they are managing, and if they are performing well and they are generating profits, so they'll also charge a performance fee. A waterfall structure is basically used in case of a partnership structure to decide how the money will be allocated to GPs and LPs. It can be on a whole of fund basis, European, and deal by deal basis, which is the American structure. So an example can be, let's say you make two investments of $10 million each. Over here you generate $16 million and over here you lose $5 million. So net profit here is 6, over here it is -5. So on a European basis, the net profit will be termed as 1. So this 1 will be distributed between the LP and GP. But here, in case of the American structure, because we make $6 million here, the distribution level of this 6 will be different from the loss here. So LPGP के बीच में एक limited partnership agreement होगा, which will decide how the waterfall structure will be, what will be the rules, and that will be how the GP will be deciding the operations of the fund. So this is very similar to what we looked into earlier. एक इन्वेस्टर है, LP है, वो डायरेक्ट भी कर सकता है. फंड मैनेजर के साथ एक इन्वेस्टमेंट फंड के थ्रू इन्वेस्ट कर सकता है, विच इज़ फंड इन्वेस्टिंग, एंड को इन्वेस्टिंग, विच इज़ वेयर एवर द फंड इज इन्वेस्टिंग यू पुट सम ऑफ द मनी हियर. So compensation structure. So as I discussed earlier, GPs, because they are looking to the day-to-day operations and they are managing the money, they charge a percentage fee as a percentage of the total assets under management or committed capital. So let's say an investor says, okay, he'll commit $100 million in a fund. So the GP will charge, let's say 1 or 2% per year of that total committed capital. They don't charge the fee on the invested capital, because if the fund charges fee on the invested capital, what will happen is GP will be incentivized to just deploy a lot of capital just to raise the fee. उसमें returns hurt हो सकते हैं. And जो in detail partnership agreement होगा उसमें सारे clauses होंगे and fees के बारे में भी लिखा रहेगा. So what are some of the clauses? So one of the clause can be the hurdle rate. So hurdle rate can be simply a minimum return which a fund has to achieve before they start earning a performance fee. So let's say the hurdle rate is 8%. So 8% तक distribution, let's say, will be 90 and 10. 90% goes to LP, 10% goes to GP. But if it is above 8, let's say it is 15%, so जो balance 7% है उसका distribution में भी 20-80. Catch-up clause is, in some cases, GPs are not allowed to earn performance fee until the initial investment or some amount of return is not generated. We'll be going over this with an example. Then the other is high watermark. So this is helpful when the value of a fund goes down. So let's say a fund goes from 100 to 110. So there's a performance fee that may be used here, but next year it goes down to 90, and then it goes back to 110 again. So the GP may say, okay, here I may have lost money, but I made a lot of money here, so I should get a performance fee in this case. But because there's a watermark clause, so the GP has to breach this level before he starts earning a performance fee. Waterfall, as I discussed earlier, is how the profits will be allocated between LPs and GPs. So there can be multiple levels. One can be, let's say, up to 8% there is a particular distribution, up to 10% there is a particular distribution, beyond that there is another distribution. A clawback clause is helpful in cases where GP is generating good returns early in the fund's life, but later on starts to lose money. So if a GP performs well early, he'll generate a lot of performance fee, but let's say the fund goes in negative later on, the LP can reclaim the performance fee that has been taken by the GP. And then we'll go over an example of the waterfall structure and with some clauses in Excel. Alright, now we'll look at some of the examples from the curriculum. So a simple example is, let's say we purchase some asset in year 1 for $10 million, and by year 4 we are able to generate $20 million. So net profit comes out to be 10. What is the IRR of the project? Simply you can use the IRR formula and comes out to be 26%. So let's say the split between the GP and LP is 80 and 20. So without any restrictions, I say like hurdle rate, cap or anything else, the LP gets 80% of the profit and the GP gets 20% of the profit. Great. So let's take an example of a catch-up clause. Let's say the total return of a project is 18% and there is also a hurdle rate of 8%. In case of the hurdle rate, what happens is up to the hurdle rate, the LP will get the entire distribution in this example. So the LP gets the first 8%. What do we have left? That is 18 minus 8, 10%. Now if we have a catch-up clause, the GP will get 20% of the remaining 10% first. So 20% of the remaining 10%, that's 2%. What is the balance? The balance is 10 minus 2, that is 8. Now the balance gets split, 20 and 80. So the GP gets 1.6, that is 8 into 20%, and the total GP becomes then 1.6 plus 2, that the total the GP gets is 3.6 and the LP gets 14.4. Let's say there was no catch-up clause. So what will happen is the LP will get the first 8%. What is the balance? The balance is 18 minus 8, that is 10. So the GP will get, the 20% of this. So that is 2%. So you'll notice that because of the GP catch-up clause, he is able to generate an extra return. Let's go with another example. So let's say the split over here is 20 and 80 like earlier, and the profit for the project is $1 million. So instead of percentages, we'll go by hard numbers, so it's a little easier to understand. So we have a $1 million profit. The hurdle for LP here is $500,000. So $500,000 तक LP को ही सब जाएगा. Great. तो LP को चला गया भाई. अब बैलेंस बचा हमारे पास $500,000. That is 1 million minus 500. Great. Now if there is no catch-up clause, so this $500,000 will be split 20-80 between the GP and LP. So 20% of 500K is $100,000 and 80% is 400. So GP in this case gets 100, simply this, and the LP gets 500 plus 400, that is 900. Now let's say there was a GP catch up clause with 20%. तो जो एक्सेस प्रॉफिट है यहाँ पर $500,000 का, उसका पहले 20% GP को चला जाएगा सीधे सीधे. So 20% of this goes to GP. Now the remaining 400,000, this will be split 20-80 again. So the GP will get another 20% of this. So that is $80,000 and the LP will get 80% of this. So that is 320. Now the GP here gets 180, that is 80 here and 100 here. So you'll notice how having a catch-up clause is helpful for the GP in this example. Alright, thank you.